The damp wood in the printing room stove smoked resin, and the warm, acrid smoke filled his throat faster than the water from the clay jug could soothe his cough. On the massive table lay stacks of thin prints, dusted with ash to prevent the sticky ink from smudging. And next to them was a dark bag of leaflets collected from homes, just seized by men in gray caftans. On the shelf between the letters for the headlines and the typesetting boxes lay rolled-up ropes, flattened wax seals, and fringes from other people's gloves. Late slush was blowing in from the gate, and the floor of the printing house was stained, as if wet footprints had been left on it, not by souls, but by politics itself. At that moment, no one cared that the pictures depicted adult bodies. What mattered was who stood to gain from declaring those bodies shameful and plague-ridden, and why the paper smelled like the sea, even though it was printed in a city on the river. The narrator greets the audience, thanks those who are listening from home, from the road, workshops, and kitchens, asks them to briefly write in the comments where they are watching from and what stories about moral prohibitions and the press circulated in their cities, says that such details help to see the past without myths, and wishes them calm attention and pleasant listening. Under a government that liked to call itself enlightened, morality was not learned through conversation. It was handed down in the form of regulations, and paper and ink made the work go faster. In the last decades of the 18th century, the capital lived on the edge between hunting for pamphlets and eagerly reading any whisper about the court. In pharmacies, people whispered about ointments for melancholy and colds. In taverns, they argued about new prohibitions. In living rooms, they collected albums with engravings promising the truth about the bedrooms of high-ranking persons. And in offices, they compiled reports on the unreliability of those who printed too quickly. The myth assured that scandals were proven and morals were saved by fire and fear. But the document showed a different mechanism. Under the guise of hunting for obscenity, political satire was caught, and under the guise of caring for the honor of the court, the market for pictures and conversations was controlled. A small printing house fell into this vortex where adult craftsmen worked, whose fingers knew the weight of a letter and the price of an incorrect line. The seizure began simply and roughly. People in gray walked through the cold corridor where calendars and prayer sheets were drying, put the inventory on the table, and collected the stacks brought the night before. A series of cartoons with headlines promising to expose the court. They acted like inspectors, whose eyes measured the paper by its smell, density, edges, and transparency. The inventory stated that a certain number of sheets had been confiscated. But the numbers were written in words, as if they were afraid of the form of numbers. Pictures were put into a bag, where adult men and women were depicted in grotesque poses, which officials called debauchery, and the street called mockery of authority. On the same day, stories spread in the markets about the decisiveness of the authorities, in taverns about the imminence of reprisals, and in homes about the stupidity of those who kept extra paper by their stoves. The printing house did not argue aloud. The owner, an elderly man, wrote down in a notebook how many sheets had been taken, and noted two oddities: thin, soft paper, with imported edges and tiny initials in the corner of some engravings that did not resemble the local ones. The first doubts came from the smell. Imported paper sometimes smelled of sea dampness and the alum-based primer of foreign factories. In the evening, the owner extinguished the stove, placed a lamp by the window, and held the remaining copies up to the light. A watermark appeared in the light, a figured crown with Latin letters, common in Western paper mills. On another sheet, a miniature emblem of a paper mill from a northern port was visible. The short signature scratched by the artist's engraving tool revealed a name previously seen in foreign satirical magazines. A mature engraver who turned politicians into allegories and spoke of power through the body as a symbol rather than a goal. These were not rumors, but technical signs: water, fiber, mark, engraver's handwriting, margin width, frame format, the structure of the strokes where the body turned into hyperbole. An investigation in the world of typography smells not of thunder, but of dust. The owner took out of the closet binders of Western magazines, kept as samples of fonts and drawings. There lay adult faces, transformed by engravers into grotesques, long chins as a symbol of stubbornness, stretched smiles as a sign of flattery, thin shins on bird-like joints as a hint of power losing its footing. These techniques differed from underground pornography, which was reproduced on cheap paper, without a mark, and with stolen names. The confiscated sheets used political hyperbole. The body was an instrument, as befits the genre of satire. Pharmacy notebooks contained notes about outbreaks of moral panic after series of cartoons, but alongside them were records of colds, fevers, weakness from hunger strikes, and endless fasting. Life remained difficult, and against this backdrop, pictures became a quick way to label someone who had become tiresome as an enemy. In the morning, the printer appeared at the address indicated in the inventory. There were no unnecessary explanations, only repeated formulas, harmful printing, indecent drawings, undermining morals. He listened to these phrases as an accountant listens to a sum, and tried to grasp the moment when the document would distinguish genre from offense. At the same time, he sent his apprentice to a paper merchant, an adult and a cautious man, to clarify the origin of the thin sheets. The merchant nodded in the direction of the northern ports and left a short note. Part of the shipment came in a bundle with foreign magazines, which customs either detained or let through for a fee. When there was a shortage of domestic paper in the city, printers took what was at hand. This explained the smell and the mark, but it did not explain who needed to mix political satire with pornography in one bag. Meanwhile, the city demanded the truth about the court. The public sought it like a cheap ointment for joint pain, fast, loud, with a bright label. They did not read official documents. They looked at sheets of paper that could be carried in their pockets. In such a market, satire instantly turned into proof. A grotesque, in which an adult dignitary was accused of immoderation, was taken as a confession. An allegory, in which an adult lady was depicted as an emblematic figure, was taken as a portrait. Thus, myth consumed the genre, and just as easily the authorities mixed sincere vulgarity with political cartoons in order to declare everything filth and close the shops at once. Police notebooks wrote about prevention, monastery notebooks about temptations, and doctors' reports about venereal diseases in adult clients of brothels, fevers in cab drivers, and frostbite in beggars. Reality was harsh, but people were more willing to discuss not the cold and ulcers, but what was written about those closer to the throne. The turning point was found in the printing house's own ledger. The income column listed a large order for illustrated sheets on thin paper, for which an advance payment had been made by a merchant with a reputation as a debater on matters of public interest. His name was known among opposition-minded nobles and scribes who liked to make the authorities look ridiculous. The order was accompanied by a stipulation that it be printed urgently and that the waste be removed so as not to attract attention. The dates coincided with the appearance of the confiscated pictures, and the initial on the payment slip matched the signature of the accountant of the trading house that maintained relations with Western booksellers. It was not a conspiratorial group, but a working combination of money and paper. An opposition merchant ordered the printing of political satire on imported paper. The printing house printed it, the inspectors confiscated it, and the public turned it into gossip. Now the printing house was caught between two millstones: closure for obscenity and special disfavor for opposition. The owner methodically gathered evidence. He used a magnifying glass to record marks, copied Latin letters, copied the signatures of engravers, compared the width of margins, and showed the coincidence of frames and strokes with Western series. He brought forms to the table as evidence, sheets from other people's binders, bought from second-hand booksellers, magazine issues with allegories where bodies were symbols of the vice of power or the greed of ministers. In one drawing, an allegorical beast with a mane reached for cups and boxes of coins. This was a hint at the insatiability of the court. In another, adult figures, separated by a screen, were depicted as two negotiators. Ink was used to mark the coldness of their gaze and the knots on the cords, a hint at the agreement and its price. Lust in such pictures was not the goal, but a rhetorical device, and those who had seen Western magazines knew how to read it. While the sparkle was going on, the controlling offices discussed the mood. They noted an increase in sales of obscene leaflets and demanded that pressure be increased on printing houses, shops, and warehouses. Some suggested taking harsh measures, but that was risky. The West was monitoring the domestic press, and any high-profile burning of materials would be reported in the press. Therefore, the procedure was shorter than a strike. Threats of closure, sudden inspections, seizure of some of the equipment, fines, and a ban on accepting new orders. The printing house found itself under such a ban and counted the days until its demise. Adult workers returned at night to cold rooms, warmed their hands over coals, and listened to their neighbors discuss the latest rumors. The doctor from the neighboring district recorded coughing from smoke, inflamed eyes from soot, and work-related insomnia among the printers in his charts. The physical side of censorship looked like this. Fear deprived them of sleep. Smoke ruined their breathing. And the cold made their joints stiff. The lawyer proposed not emotion, but procedure. Demand an expert examination of the origin of the paper and the drawing. Show the foreign mark on the fiber. Present the engraver's signatures. Prove the journalistic nature of the images. In this dryness lay hope. The courts liked to distinguish genre from misconduct when they were brought cases for review. The opposition merchant disappeared as those who use someone else's machine and someone else's risk disappear. What remained were his payments and records in the accounts, where advances went through intermediaries with Western connections. During interrogations, this trail was called commercial, not political, because it was calmer that way. But in the context of a witch hunt, any commercial trail became a weapon. At the same time, the street continued to demand the truth. In living rooms, the details of executions in past years were retold as moral lessons. In taverns, there were calls to end debauchery, and at fairs, sellers loudly promised true pictures in order to sell their paper goods. Townspeople, adults tired of winter, were more willing to buy bright colors than gray ones. Their backs ached, their wallets were empty, their hearts were heavy, and in this state, a picture provided a light relief, replacing talk of taxes, supplies, and debts. Doctors wrote about fevers and exhaustion, but no one read these articles in the squares. There they read the crude caption under the engraving and took the symbol for fact. The myth gained strength, while the document lagged behind. And yet the document found a loophole. The examination of the paper turned out to be boring. The sheet was held up to the light, the threads in the fiber were counted, and the watermark pattern was checked against the catalog of imported manufactures. The seized sheets bore the mark of a Western factory with Latin initials, under which no local paper mill operated. The experts, adult craftsmen from the workshop, recorded this in a dry report. Then they checked the engraver's signatures. On several sheets, the initials of artists who had long been published in foreign satirical magazines could be guessed, and the character of the strokes and the structure of the allegories coincided with the approved samples when viewed through a magnifying glass. This was not an excuse for filth. It was a division of genres. Political satire as allegory and pornography as a commodity for arousal are different entities. The former describes power through the body as a symbol. The latter trades the body as an end in itself. At the meeting where the fate of the printing house was decided, there were no loud speeches. They shuffled papers, read documents, and checked signatures. The representative of the office insisted on the harmfulness of the material. The representative of the workshop reminded everyone of the origin of the paper. And the lawyer repeated that the absence of a local signature and the presence of a foreign watermark in the bundle of magazines indicated that the genre of satire had been imported, rather than that obscenity had been produced. The judges were grown men, tired of floods, droughts, and unpaid bills, and they were more familiar with the word procedure than the word scandal. And yet, the crowd's demand for truth, which they brought in the form of petitions, shouted in shops, and whispered over tea, weighed heavily. This demand was not a thirst for truth, but a thirst for a simple explanation of a complex life. The solution was born out of compromise. The leaflets were labeled as political satire, with an indication of foreign origin. Printing houses were fined for carelessness when ordering and were temporarily banned from accepting unnamed drawings on thin imported paper. Pornography was still banned and punished, and this was recorded separately, so that the genres would not be confused again. The phrase remained in the register. Part of the confiscated material was returned with a note about its journalistic nature. The shops became quieter, not because everyone had become believers, but because the document separated satire from obscenity, and the hunt for filth had to be conducted more carefully. The myth of proven scandals did not disappear. It went into whispers. The printing house was saved from closure. The machines survived the winter and spring, and the craftsmen returned to simple orders, calendars, instructions, announcements about the delivery of firewood and fish. The owner kept a folder with samples of marks and signatures of engravers, just as a carpenter keeps a square and a plumb line. He understood that this folder was more important than a passionate speech. When the men in gray came again, he would show not emotion, but a line. In the neighboring courtyards, people continued to say that there was decay at the top, and these words warmed the evenings, because it is easier to discuss someone else's bed than one's own duty. The doctor continued to diagnose the symptoms of adults enduring cold nights and hard labor, and wrote that the insomnia of printers was associated not only with smoke and coffee, but also with the fear of inspection. There are no winners here, only divided fields. Political satire on one side, pornography on the other, and between them, the courts and the press as instruments of distinction. The myth of the proven scandals survived, but lost the support of the document. The document stating that sheets are a genre of satire of foreign origin became a support for those who work with their hands, not their voices. The authorities maintained the ban on obscenity and tightened their usual control, but lost the convenient club with which to beat any drawing. The public did not receive the truth about the court, but rather a boring label. But this boredom was also a salvation. It took the conversation out of the bedroom and into the courtyard of the chancellery, where the paper smells of dust rather than fire. After that, everything seemed mundane. The warehouse once again accepted thin stockings, but now each pair was checked against the light. The craftsman learned to distinguish between fibers, just as an apothecary distinguishes between herbs. Merchants without a name were turned away at the gate. Reports more often mentioned the import of political magazines and fines for attempting to sell obscene material under the guise of satire. The students had fewer sleepless nights, but the fear did not disappear. It lasts longer than the procedure. In workshops, people stopped openly laughing at the authorities and stopped fearing them aloud. A fine line of craftsmanship remained, gathering facts, separating genres, showing that allegory is not an invitation to vice, but a way to name the vice of power. The audience, mature and weary, found a new topic of conversation: the prices of bread and firewood, and only occasionally returned to the rolled-up sheets to check whether the truth had returned in a vivid form. This chronicle sounds like a confession of paper. There is no place in it for direct shouting and public disputes. There is only the stubborn work of looking at the light, counting the threads, recognizing the signature, keeping catalogs of signs, and bringing them to the court table. The authorities still love formulas, censors still visit more often than necessary, and the market still buys loud and cheap. But where the printing house was able to show the mark of a foreign paper mill and the name of an adult engraver from a distant port, the myth weakened, like smoke weakening in an open window. And although the houses still smell of coal and dampness, although people are still sick and tired, the opportunity to name the genre by its name makes the air warmer. This is not a victory. It is a method of survival. To hold a sheet in your hands so that not only the picture is visible, but also the fiber. And if new dirty sheets of paper are laid on the table next time, the printing house will already be in the habit of asking not who is laughing, but what mark is on the paper and whose hand held the cutter. Then politics will stop hiding behind the bed, and the bed will stop serving as a club. This is how a small but stubborn difference is born, for the sake of which the masters have trained themselves to read light, not just words. Paper is heavy and not silent. It lies on the table and forces you to walk the same paths without detours. This dry sequence repeats itself, turning hearing into a line and a line into action. The memory of an era becomes a craft of verification, where a signature is distinguished from a slogan. Bodies did not become happier, but they became more protected by the boundary of words and judgment. Fear moved from whispers to procedure, and procedure became routine. Economy ceased to hide behind preaching and came out into the income and expense books. The map of power has learned to distinguish commercial buzz from a controlled campaign. The craft of printing proved stronger than a beautiful threat when it is governed by rules. The sheet no longer belongs to one court. It has been numbered by law. This is practical honesty, not consolation, but order, not a miracle, but the repeatability of a step.